Hi folks, welcome to Chapter 7, your final chapter from your Microsoft Access textbook. You can get these notes from the course website at mgs351.com under the Microsoft Access section of the lecture notes. I'm going to download the corresponding data file for Chapter 7 to use for today's lecture. So this chapter is all about bringing everything we've learned this semester into one unified, user-friendly database system. And there are a few different topics we'll be covering. The first is an introductory topic of query-based forms. So far we've only looked at forms that were built on single tables or maybe forms and subforms, but there are some advantages to building a form off of a query. We're going to see a few of those advantages. One of those advantages we'll spend some time on is called auto lookup. Again, this is something that's going to be much easier to show you than to try to describe in words, but we'll be spending a little time on that. It's a feature that some of you might be able to use for your project. Don't try to force this into your project if it doesn't fit. You won't lose points if you don't have it in there. It's just one of those things that some project designs are better suited for than others. The next topic, which are menu systems, are a requirement for your project. So you do have to have either a switchboard or a menu system built on blank forms or navigation forms, and I'll show you the three main ways you can do this. And lastly, we'll cover macros, which are the final object in Microsoft Access that we're going to be covering. We've covered tables, queries, forms, reports, and now macros. I'll show a few examples of macros. For your project, you are required to build what's called an AutoExec macro and a help button. They're very easy to do. I'll show you exactly how to do that in today's lecture. So, first of all, query-based forms. Some of the advantages of query-based forms that we'll find is that you can show data from multiple tables. Similar to what you can do in subforms, but it's not going to have the same visual separation of the data. You can also display calculated fields, and this is if you build a calculation or an expression in a query, it will automatically be available in the form to display that as well. Now, that's not to say you need a query to display calculations, but if you're trying to do calculations based on multiple tables, yes, you would need a query. We can also utilize auto lookup, which again, we'll spend some time on that, and you can sort the data however you'd like to sort it. So what is auto lookup? I'm going to show you an example. I'm going to explain this. I'm going to show you an example, and I'll tie in those other benefits of query-based forms in just a minute. So the best I can explain it, auto lookup will automatically look up data on your form based on a primary key. So if you enter in a primary key value, it magically looks up all the other data. In order for auto lookup to work, there are two requirements. First of all, the tables used in the query must have a one-to-many relationship, and for all of your projects, they should. The second part, which again is hard to visualize, but you'll see in a little bit, the join field in the query, in other words, the field in which you have the connection between the primary key and the foreign key, that field must be selected from the many side of the relationship, not the one side of the relationship. If you do those two things, auto lookup just works in Access. It's a kind of a built-in feature. So let's get right to the example, because again, I know my words describing this really fall flat. It's really best to show you how this works with an example. So we have the computer store database we're working with today, and this is a typical ordering system. I'm going to go to the relationships window to show you. We have our customers table, we have our orders table, which is one record for every order, we have our products table, which is one record for every product, and we have our order details table, which is the intersection table between orders and products. So this is one record for every item that has been made during a purchase. So for example, if I make a purchase at this computer store and I buy a mouse, I buy an external hard drive, and I buy a monitor, those three items for my order would show up as three records in this order details table. I'll have one record in the orders table for the particular date I placed that order or I showed up at the store, and I'll of course have one record corresponding to me as a customer. But just to highlight a little bit of the difference between orders and order details for you. So this is a high-level view of what the data we have in here, and let me go and show you this Superstore order form complete. And in this form and subform, we have several examples of query-based forms. So the main form is showing us data from customers and orders. The subform is showing us data from order details and the products table. So I when I set up the relationships here, I purposely align these this way. So the customers and orders table correspond to what you see on that main part of the form. The products and order details tables correspond to what you see in the subform. So what's auto lookup? Well, let's go to a new record and I can show you. So I go ahead and I type in a customer record. Let's say I type in customer 5. As soon as I hit tab, you're going to see auto lookup happen. I hit tab and it looks up customer 5's record. It says, oh, that's Michael Ware at this address with this phone number. That's the beauty of auto lookup. I type in the foreign key value for customer 5. It's technically the foreign key, even though it's also a primary key in the customers table, but that field is the foreign key field. And then it looks up all the related customer data from the customers table corresponding to that particular customer ID. So I think you can see how this could be very useful. Down in the subform, we also have auto lookup working as well. So let me go ahead and enter in some product ID. I'm just going to pick a random product 3. As soon as I hit tab, you'll see it looks up the product name, the price. I can type in the quantity. We'll get 4 of those, and it calculates the amount. So, you know, we saw very briefly a slide that said the benefits of query-based forms, and let me just go back to that. We have we can display data from multiple tables. Showed you that. We can display calculated fields. Showed you that with the total, where we calculated the total based on the price and the amount. We're utilizing auto lookup, and you can sort the data however you choose. And I believe this is sorted by order ID. Actually, I take that back. It's sorted by customer ID. If you look as I'm going backwards here, you'll see the customer ID is getting higher and higher. So the queries are what are essentially allowing all these capabilities to work. And let me just show you what those 2 queries are. So we'll first look at the query used to build the main form, which is the order with customer information. If I go to the design view, you'll see it's based on the customers and orders. And really nothing else special than that. We're just selecting the fields from each of the tables. But in order for auto lookup to work, let me go back to this slide. You have to have tables in a query that have a one-to-many relationship. We have that. And the join field in the query must be taken from the many side. Again, what does that mean? So this line which connects the 2 tables, up until now we've called that the relationship line. And that's accurate. You know, this is what we refer to it as. But when we see this line in a query, it's typically referred to as a join or a join line. So while it's effectively the same thing, it's showing how the tables are related, understand it has a bit of different terminology. So in order for auto lookup to work, the join field, which in this case the join field is customer ID and customer ID, right? Because those are the 2 fields that are linked. And we have the option of selecting customer ID from the customers table on the one side, or we can select customer ID from the orders table on the many side. In order for auto lookup to work, you must select the foreign key, the customer ID on the many side, in this case from the orders table. If you look down here, you'll see it is customer ID from the orders table. If I selected customer ID from the customers table and put it down here, auto lookup does not work. So that's the requirement for it to work. And interestingly, auto lookup is really not a feature in a form, it's a feature of the query itself. If I run this query, we can actually test to see if auto lookup works right now. So if I go ahead and I change customer 4 to customer 5, as soon as I move off this record, you see it will update that customer information to customer 5. And again, auto lookup is actually built in as a function of query based on multiple tables. The form reflects that because it's built off of the query as well. Now the other query that is used to build the subform is the order details with product information query. So if I open this in design view, you'll see that again it has 2 tables with a one-to-many relationship, so that's the first criteria. The second criteria for auto lookup to work is that the join field, which in this case is product ID, must be selected from the many side, which for this example is the order details table. If we look down here, product ID is selected from order details, so auto lookup should work. We also have the order IDs displaying in the subform in ascending order, and we have a little expression so we can display some calculated data based on quantity times price. So all the benefits really of the query-based form. Again, we can run this query and you'll see that if I change the product ID, from say product 11 or 14 to say product 11. I move off that record and it updates that particular product information. So again, auto lookup is part of the query. Because we build the form off the query, it looks like the form has that feature, which it effectively does. But ultimately, it's built in the query itself. So if you're having trouble with auto lookup, go look at your query, because that's probably the root of the cause. Okay, so if we go back to the Superstore order form complete, again, just to reiterate, we have 4 tables of data being displayed on one single form. 2 tables on the main form, 2 tables on the subform. We have a query used to build the main form and a query used to build the subform. We're also benefiting from auto lookup. So I can put in product IDs down here and it automatically looks up. I can change the customer ID here and it will automatically change the customer information. So extremely powerful. Again, this doesn't fit for every project idea. Obviously for ordering systems, it can. It works quite well, but you really have to figure out if this is how you need your end users to interact with the data. That's really what you should be thinking about. What's the workflow of the user as they're working with the database and they're entering in data? Will auto lookup really help them out? So keep that in mind. And of course, I'm happy to help you think through whether auto lookup is a feature that makes sense or not in your database. Okay, so let's go back to the notes. The next topic is going to be about different menu systems that you have. So we're going to look at 3 different options of menus that you can build. Now, if you think back to early in the semester, you worked in the team information database, and there was a menu that popped up that you clicked on a button to enter in data, and later on you were able to run some reports off of there. And all those items were nicely held in this little menu system. And that was built using what's called the switchboard menu system. It's kind of the classic menu system in Microsoft Access. There are some constraints to it, but it's very easy to build. It has kind of a distinctive look to it. There are some limitations, like you can only put 8 items per menu page. You can have multiple pages, so you can have like a main menu and sub-menus off of that. So that's one of the ways to get around with that. The wizard, which I'm going to show you in just a second, actually creates a table called switchboard items and a form, which is called switchboard. And it's very important. These 2 things work together, so you really don't want to mess with the text boxes or buttons. If you delete the wrong thing, it'll actually break the whole switchboard. So again, be careful about doing that. Now, in newer versions of Microsoft Access, the switchboard manager is not enabled. And this is partly because Access is trying to move a little more towards the web technologies and offering some menu systems that are more web enabled. The switchboard system does not convert well to a web technology. And so it's still available in the Microsoft Access. It's just not enabled on the toolbar. So if you go to your textbook, page 73, step 12, will explain how to enable the switchboard manager button on the ribbon in Microsoft Access. So I already have it enabled on this computer, so we're not going to go through those steps, but refer to your textbook. It should be a one-time thing. You only should have to enable it once, and it should be then available there to use. So another option, we'll go through each of these 3 options and I'll show you how they work. Another option is to build a menu off of a blank form. So you can literally take a blank form and add buttons to it that open up your forms and open up your reports. And you have really unlimited flexibility. You can arrange things, design things, format things however you choose. You're not constrained by the switchboard, which is a very specific style. And so if you have an eye for design and you want to take some time to build a really nice looking menu, using the blank form as your basis, you're building it all from scratch, but it's a way that you can build a really nice looking form. And the third option, which is one that's the newest option, and I'm personally I've struggled a little bit with figuring out how this fits in well with databases, and admittedly, I'll be the first to admit it just might be my reluctance to change, but this is a navigation form menu system. And students over the years have used this creatively, which is nice to see, kind of some really good use cases of how this particular menu system can be beneficial for a database. It's the less traditional click through the buttons on a menu. It's more about just going right to the reports or forms that you want to access in kind of corresponding tabs. This is their newer menu technology, which is really designed for web integration, but you still are limited in how you can customize it. So let's take a look at how to build these examples. So if we close this form, I'm going to close a few things here, and we're going to go ahead and start with the Switchboard Manager. So under Database Tools, I added the button to the ribbon here called Switchboard Manager. I go ahead and click on that button, and the first time you run it, it's going to say, hey, there's no switchboard in here. Do you want to build it? And of course, yes, we do. And this Switchboard Manager window pops up. The first thing you're going to see is a list of all the switchboard pages. Now, when you hear the word switchboard, just think of the word menu, right? So these are a list of all your menu pages. Right now, we have one single main menu page, and it's the default page that's going to open up. You can create several more just by clicking New. We're not going to do that just yet. For your homework assignment, you will do that. You'll have multiple menu pages in the switchboard. Again, this allows you to have more than 8 items on a particular menu page. Now, if I want to add buttons to this menu page, I go ahead and click Edit. And this next window that we're seeing, we're kind of drilling down into the wizard here. The next window you see is going to show me all the buttons that are on the switchboard. And right now, there are none, right? So the other thing is, there's a switchboard name. By default, it's called Main Switchboard. I'm going to call it Main Menu. Just change it up a little bit. And I'm going to click New to add buttons. And so if we want to add buttons for all our forms and all our reports, right now we only have forms. I'll go ahead and build a report in just a minute. And you'll see there are different commands that we can choose from. Opening forms, opening reports. A little bit later, we're going to see how we can use macros. And there's a go to switchboard function too. This is for when you have multiple switchboard pages, in other words, a main menu and a submenu, and you need to navigate from a main menu to a submenu. This is the action that you choose. For opening forms, there are 2 options. There's what's called Add Mode and Edit Mode. Now, for your project, what I'd request is if you use the switchboard and you're opening your forms, please open in Edit Mode. And it's solely for grading purposes, because what it allows us to do is to look through the form and the examples of data. Add Mode just opens up a blank form with no data in there. So it's easier for us to be able to navigate through it. So we won't hold it against you if you open a form in Edit Mode for our sake, and it really should be just opened in Add Mode, so for just further data entry. Please, for grading purposes, choose Edit Mode. It makes our lives a lot easier. So we're going to choose that option, Open Form in Edit Mode, and you'll see that all the forms are available to choose from. So I'm going to open up the Superstore Order Form Complete, and then the text is just going to be literally the name of the button. So I'm going to say Open Order Form. That's literally the text that's going to display, and click OK. I'm going to add another button. We're going to add a button to exit the application, so I'm going to call it Quit. And you see there's no other option for that. It's simply, do you want to quit? So I click OK. And I now have 2 buttons on my menu form, opening the order form and quit. When I close this, and I close this also, you'll see I can go over here to the switchboard, double click, and there are my 2 buttons. So I click open order form, and there's my order form. And trust me, when I click quit, it will quit the database. I'm going to go ahead and build a report or 2 just to have some other examples of things we can play with. So I'm just going to create a plain old report off of customers, call it customers. This is obviously not well designed, but it's just more for placeholders and examples. And I'll create a products report too. So go ahead and click create report. I have products selected, so there we go. There's a list of all the products. And we'll call that products report. So now we have a few other interesting things here. If I want to go back to the menu and add these, it's very easy to do. I go to my Database Tools and Switchboard Manager. Again, this is my list of all the menu pages. We only have one menu, so I edit that menu. And here are my buttons. And I want to add a new button to open up the Customers Report and another one to open the Products Report. So I'm going to call it Open Customers Report. The command is going to be Open Report. And I select the report I want to open. And then another one for opening the Products Report. So Open Products Report. Again, Open Report, and we'll choose the Products Report for this example. So there we go. We have these 4 buttons, and what's very important is the order that you see them here is the order they're going to show up on the switchboard. And we probably don't want the quit button right there. So in order to rearrange these at all, you need to use these move up and move down buttons here. So I'm going to select move down, and put that right at the bottom. So now when we open the switchboard again, it will do that properly. Oh, the other thing I forgot to check, we renamed it to main menu. Sometimes this doesn't work, and it's actually a very frustrating bug. It's a bug in Access that can drive a lot of students nuts, but there's a very easy solution. We'll check to see if it actually worked or not. Whenever I try to make it break, it doesn't work. So let's see. Let's go to the switchboard forms. It's showing up here as main menu, so it worked. All right, but here's the thing. If you switched it to say main menu or something else, and it still has an old name in there, and you change it 10 times and it still doesn't, it doesn't take, it just still shows the same thing, there's a very easy fix. Go up to File, Compact and Repair Your Database, and it will immediately fix it. That's all you have to do. So there's some weird bug. I'm not sure exactly the condition that causes it to happen, but I've seen it many times each semester. And just remember, compact and repair the database. That will solve that problem for you. All right, so we've got a nice little menu here with our reports now included, and we can open those and navigate to them, which is really nice. So that's a really quick look at how you would build a switchboard main menu. For your project, you'll want to make sure that you have buttons to open up all your forms and all of your reports. Now that doesn't mean your subforms too, right? If you have a main form with a subform in it, you only have to open up the main form. You don't have to have a separate button to open the subform. So just keep that in mind. All right, the next way we can build a main menu is with a blank form. So let's go ahead and do that. And again, you only have to choose one of these approaches. I'm just showing you all three of them very briefly. So we'll go to Create, and there's blank form right there. And in Design View, I can just add buttons from the Controls toolbox. So there's the button wizard, and I can say things like, okay, let's go ahead and open a form, and we'll open the Superstore order form complete. We'll show all the records, and we'll say open order form, and finish. And now we have a nice little button to open the order form. I'm going to add a couple buttons for the reports too. So let's drop this in here. There's under report operations. There's open report. And we can open the customers report. I'm going to say open customers report. And you get the idea. We'll add one also for the products report too. So there's report operations, open report, there's products report, and we'll change the text to reflect that. So obviously this is a very rough start to what we want, and that's okay to start this way, get all the buttons and things working the way you need them to, and then you can spend a lot of time formatting them, making them look really nice. But you'll see they work just like the buttons on the switchboard. They just visually are different. You can move things around however you want. So there's the reports and so on. We'll actually also add a button to exit the database. So click on here. I think it's under application. There we go. There's quit application. And we're going to say exit and finish. So we have the start of a main menu system that will have buttons to open our various forms and our various reports. We can save it with the name. In this case, we'll call it main menu. You can call it whatever you want, but main menu makes sense. And so now we have a form called main menu, which can also be used as a menu system. I forgot, let me just go back to the switchboard for 1 second. I showed you the finished view of the switchboard, but let me show you the design view. And so there's a little word of caution. You'll notice that even though there are 4 buttons on the actual switchboard, it only showed up 1 button in the design view. And if you start messing around with this stuff too much, like if I try to delete the shadow behind there, oh, I didn't delete the shadow, but I deleted the foreground. Just watch what happens. If I go back to form view, it yells at me, it says it's broken, it doesn't work. And so be very, very careful. The good news is that if you do break your switchboard, it's pretty easy to recover. Your textbook has some information. It's about half dozen or so steps that can walk you through how to recover a switchboard if you end up breaking it like this. It's actually based on an experience I had with a company years ago. They had one of their data entry operators, for whatever reason, somehow got into the design view of the switchboard just while they were typing, just hit some weird keystrokes and overwrote something. And so nobody could get back into their system because the switchboard was broke. So I came in, I rebuilt their switchboard based on their existing menu, and it's actually a pretty easy way to recover at least the buttons and their content. You'll lose formatting, but that's okay. You know, if your main menu is back and your buttons are working, that's the first step. So anyway, if you do run into this, those steps in your textbook that explain, it's called switchboard troubleshooting, those were literally the steps I followed and build a company to do work for. So if you ever run into this problem in the future, you have a solution, a canned solution that will work, whether it's in this class or in the future. So the good thing is I didn't save this, so I'm going to say no, we don't want to save the switchboard. And so it should work now. But just to show you how fragile it really is if you delete the wrong thing. And again, don't rename things. Really try not to mess with too much. You can play with the colors and the fonts, but be very, very careful otherwise. Okay, the third type of form is the navigation form. So let me show you a quick example of that. You'll see under the Create tab, there is an option for navigation forms. And there are different formats you can choose from. We'll select the horizontal tabs. And this is really more like tab navigation. And so if we want, we can put the Superstore order form right up here. Then next to it, we can put the customers report. And then next to it, we can put the products report. And this truly is your menu. You're just clicking through the different objects and it opens it live for you. And so it's just a different model of a form, or excuse me, of a menu system. Again, this is perfectly acceptable. You do have some limitations as to what you can put on this particular navigation form, but it is a really clean, concise way to show all the things that you need to the end user at once. So again, under Create and Navigation Form, you have the various options to choose from. And it's just a drag and drop to put them in there. So you have a lot of options for your menu systems. I also want to point out for the switchboard, while you'll be doing this in your homework assignment, it might be worth to show you how to build a submenu real quickly. So let's assume that I want to put the reports on a different menu page. Now, granted, we haven't hit the 8 button limit, and that's okay. But let's just, for the sake of the example, do this. So in order to build a submenu, I go back to the Switchboard Manager. I create a new menu page. I'm going to call it Reports, because I want this menu to have the reports on it. And in the Reports menu, I'm going to add a button for opening the Customers Report. And again, I just have to rebuild these buttons real quickly. And I'm going to add a button to open the products as well. So open this report for the products, and we now have our 2 buttons there. Perfect. On the main menu, when I edit this, I can remove these 2 buttons. We don't need these customers and products reports buttons here. But what we will need is a way to actually navigate to that reports menu. And this is done through the go to switchboard command. Remember, I talked about this earlier. So we can say open reports menu. And we say go to switchboard, and we want to go to the report switchboard. So you have to have the switchboard built before you can build the button, obviously. It won't work otherwise. So I click OK, and I'll move this up because I want this right here. And we say close. And if we go to the reports menu, it's got 2 buttons. What's it missing? There's one very important button that's missing. It's missing a button to return to the main menu, right? Because if you can navigate to this menu page, you need a way to navigate out of this menu page. So let's add a new button. And we'll say return to main menu. And again, you use go to switchboard. In this case, you just navigate back to the main menu switchboard. So now we have a way to loop back to that main menu and switch between these multiple pages. So close it, open up our switchboard. There's our main menu, right, with our order form, and then we can go to Open Reports menu. I click on that. Opens up the Reports submenu, and I can access all my reports from here. I then can return to the main menu if necessary. So you can build a whole menu system with multiple levels if you need. For most projects, you really only need 1 or 2, at most 3 switchboard pages, and so you don't need to overdo it. But sometimes people get creative with having like a managerial interface versus a user interface, and so again, you can get creative, and those are legitimately real things that you might find in the real world. Okay, so that's a look at switchboards. I did mention there is actually one more thing I want to point out. There is an 8 button limit, but there's a way to get around that a little bit. Obviously I showed you how to do this with multiple switchboard pages, but if you just need like a button to add to this to like exit the whole application, what you can do is you can just drop it right here and say quit application, and we'll say exit, and then finish. That button will be available on the main menu and also the reports menu. So every menu page you create, that button's going to show up. So for something like an exit button, that makes sense. So if you need 9 buttons and one of those buttons is an exit button, here's a way to get around that. And so you'll also see a little bit later when we do the help button that we can do the same thing with a help button if we don't have enough space, because it makes sense to have those buttons on each switchboard page. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, we're going to talk now about macros. So macros are kind of like little computer programs. Now don't get worried because you're not going to do any programming. It's literally selecting actions, step-by-step things that you want the database to do. It's useful for kind of the rudimentary things that you want to do in a database. Things that we've used the wizards for before, the command button wizard to do. Macros give you a little more control and capability than what you have through the command button wizard. It's all about making the application easier to use, right? It's all about user friendliness. So we're going to go through a few examples of this, starting with the help button. I'm going to talk about these and I'll go back and work through them. So the help button is a requirement for your project. You have to build this. And this is a good starting one because it's a very simple macro. I'll show you the mechanics of how this all works. All we want this button to do, when you click this button, it should pop up a little message that says this message. Please call this number for technical support. That's it. So let's use this as the first example to show you how macros work. It's going to be using something called the message box function. All right, so you'll see in just a second what that means. So I go ahead to create, and over here is a macro. And you notice on the left-hand side we have tables, queries, forms, and reports, but we don't have macros yet. We will soon. Now, a macro, again, is a series of commands or actions, and there's a whole list of actions that you can choose from. We're going to talk about just a small handful of these today. And so really, there's a lot more to be explored on your own if you want. They're pretty powerful, a lot of things you can do. Beyond macros, you would then do Visual Basic Programming within Microsoft Access, which is beyond the scope of this class, but I just want to point out that's sort of the next step beyond macros. If the macros aren't doing what you need it to do, you can actually write computer code to have the database do exactly what you need. All right, so again, we want to build a button that we can place on, say, the main menu, that when you click on it, it will pop up a little message that says, hey, contact this number for help. We have to use the message box action, which is right here. And you see when we select it, that gives you a series of kind of fill-in boxes to choose from. So this first one's required, the message. It's literally the message you want to display. So we're going to say, please call 645-3249 for help. We can then choose whether we want it to beep or not, what type of message it should be, if it's a critical, warning question, warning exclamation, or information. We're going to say it's an information box. And we can have a title on the title bar. And so we'll put it in all caps, help. We basically have just built the help button macro. This is the first step. And we can test it out. We can click this run button. Just like a query, it has a run button. You have the same thing in a macro. It's going to ask me to save it first. So let's save it with the name help. As soon as I save it, you'll see it run. There we go, little pop-up box. You see there's the information icon. Here's the title, the help, and here's the actual content of the message box. And so again, these macros give you finer grained control over the things that display and how the database works. And this is just one example of it. All right, we've only done half the work so far. We've built the little macro, right? There it is. We can double click on it and run it, and it will pop up this message. But what we really want to do is to add it to our menu system, right? So I'll show you both ways. I'll show you adding to the switchboard and adding to the blank form. So adding the switchboard is actually pretty straightforward. If we go to Switchboard Manager, we'll add this to the main menu. I'm going to edit that. I'm going to add a new button, and the text is going to be help. Again, whatever you want to display. The action or the command is run macro. Makes sense, right? So when you click this button, you want the database to go run a macro, and the macro you want to run is the help macro that we've just built. So now when I close this and open the switchboard, you'll see it now has a help button tied right to the switchboard, and you click on it and it gives us a little message. So you go build the macro and then you tie it to your menu system. So that's how you do it with a switchboard. To do it to your to something like a blank form menu, there's a few ways to do it. So in Design View, you can just add a button using the Command Button Wizard, which we've done, for all these other buttons. Under Miscellaneous, there's an option called Run Macro. And again, we can just go through the wizard and say which macro do you want to run, what do you want to call it, and so on. So when we click on that button, it should work. There's actually another way we can do this. So in the Design View, or even Layout View, I believe, you can drag and drop a macro from this window over here on the left over to the actual form itself. So I just drag it over here, drop it in there, and it automatically works. So that's probably the most direct way to do it when you have a blank form, and it works just the same. So as with most things with Microsoft, there's lots of ways to do it, some more direct than the others. So there's how you take a macro, build it, and then connect it to a form. So when you click on it, it actually performs its action. All right, we have a few other macros to go over. The next one is the AutoExec macro. This is another required macro for your project. And actually, I'm going to do another macro before this one. Now that we've done a basic macro, let's go ahead and build a macro that will open up our order form for us. Now, we already have a button that does this, but I wanted to do something a little different. When I open this order form, think about in detail what you really want to have happen. Now, if you really break it down to its lowest level of detail, what you really want to have happen is this. You want the form to open. It'd be nice to maximize the window. You then would want to go to a new record, and you'd want to place the mouse cursor in the customer ID field, because you can't put anything in order ID. It's auto number, so it automatically shows up. So to really make this streamlined, right, and as great as possible way to open the form, you want that macro to do those four things. Open it, maximize the window to fill the screen, navigate to a new record, because typically you're entering a new order, and place the mouse cursor in customer ID field. You might think, well, what's the big deal about that? Trust me, when somebody is working with an application day in and day out, saving a mouse click or a keystroke every time they use it adds up a lot. It just makes them work faster. They don't have to deal with like extra mouse clicks, and it's just all around better. So you really have to train yourself to think, though, at that level. Like, literally, what is somebody doing next? What button are they clicking next? What should be the next step? So let me show you how this is built, and then we'll go ahead and add that macro. Now, one thing I do have to get is for this customer ID, I want to grab the name of this, because while most of these things have great wizards that identify all these controls, this is one that doesn't. We have to actually paste the name of this in the macro when we build it. So let's go ahead and create a new macro. And again, it's going to do four things. The first thing we want to do is to open the form. So as you might guess, there's an option for open form. We select that, and we select the form name. So there's Superstore Order Form Complete. The rest of the options we're just going to leave as is. After we've opened the form, we want to maximize the window. And there is an action for maximize window. Next, we want to go to a new record. So there's an option or an action for go to record. Now, it's a bit redundant. We have to tell it which object, so it's going to be a form. It doesn't know like we're on that form and to do it, so we have to be very specific. The actual object, so which form do we want to do this for? And do we want to do it for the next record, previous? Nope, we want to go to a new record. All right, so we've got 3 of the 4 steps. We're opening a form, we're expanding it to fill the window, we're going to a new record, and lastly, we want to move that mouse pointer into that particular control. And there's an action called go to control, which will put that mouse pointer in there. And this is where I said I have to paste the name of it. It doesn't work otherwise. So you have to give the exact name of that control, which is customer ID. And there we go. So I'm going to save this macro. We'll call this open orders. and I can run it. When I click the run button, it should do those 4 things for us very quickly. So let's do it. There you go. It opened it, maximized, went to a new record, and the mouse pointer is right there in customer ID, so I can start typing a customer number and go on with the order. So that's how you create a database. One example, I should say, how you create a database that's more streamlined and much more user-friendly for the user. So these are definitely things that are a little above and beyond that we want you to think about for your project. How can you use macros in a way to improve the usability and the user-friendliness of the application for the end user? I'm also going to show you how to add that button to the form. So we added it to, and what I mean by that is to the main menu form and to the switchboard form. So adding it to the switchboard is pretty easy. We already have a switchboard button for opening order form, but this is the old one. It's just kind of the built-in, hey, go open this form. Instead, we can go back to the switchboard manager, edit the menu, edit the button for open order form, and instead of using the built-in command called open form, choose the command for run macro. And then we select the macro that we want to run. So in this case, we want to run the open orders macro. So the way this works is when you click the open order form button on the switchboard, it's going to tell it to run the open orders macro. And that open orders macro will open the orders form, maximize it, go to a new record, and place the mouse cursor in that control. So that's how you can switch it if you need to on the switchboard. And let's just test that out. Now this button should do all those 4 things, and there we go, it did. So very good. Now, to add this to the main menu form, right, if you're using a blank form, there's a couple ways to do this. Obviously, you can just go in like we did with the other buttons, or let's just do the most direct route, right? Drag and drop it in. There we go. We've got open orders. I do want to show you a little bit about the properties over here, because what you might find is, like, say you want to keep this button, you spend a lot of time formatting it, doing whatever you want it, it's in the right place, and you don't want to add a new button. What you can do is you can actually change what this button does. If you go over to the event tab for that particular button, you'll see there's an action called onClick, and this is typically the action that's going to do something when you have a button. When you click it, you want it to go do something. Right now, it's running what's called an embedded macro. That's because we used the wizard to build this, and so it has it all kind of built in. This macro is going to go and open that form for us. But if we click on the drop-down list, you'll see you have other options to choose from. It has all the macros, all 2 that we've built, but there's the open orders macro. And so you can just select that, and now this button that I have selected will run the open orders macro when you click it. Simple as that. So if that property, that onClick property for the button, you just change that particular action, and you've essentially updated that button. I mentioned earlier then beyond this is Visual Basic, and just to show you, right here where it says event procedure, and again, this is not part of the class, but I just want to show you for those who might be interested, this is what you use for writing code. These 3 little buttons next to it, then you open this and it opens a whole new world of Microsoft Access. This is where you can literally write code to perform actions, but we're not going to do that. Just want to point it out in case any of you are interested. This is where you head. But let me switch it back from there to the open orders macro, and we'll test that. So this button now has been updated. Let's see what it does. There we go. So it does those 4 actions for us. So I've got one more example to go through, which is the AutoExec macro. This is a required macro for your project. It's called the AutoExec macro because it's based on 2 words, automatically execute. This is a macro that will automatically run when you start the database. Typically, what you want this macro to do is to open up the main menu, right? That's typically what you want it to do. The only special thing you need to do is to save it with the name AutoExec. So you can build a macro to do whatever you want. If you save it with the name AutoExec, it's going to run it automatically when the database is started up. So let's go ahead and build that. So I go to Create Macro, and we're going to have it open up our switchboard form. Let's say we'll use that as our menu. So we already know how to open a form. We just go down here, we say Open Form, select which form we want to open. We'll say Switchboard. We'll leave the rest of those by default, and then we'll close it and save it with the name AutoExec. exec, right? Remember, that's the key. Now, I can double click on this to test it out, see if it opens the form, which it does, but the real test is what happens when I close the database and reopen it. So let me close this database. I have it here on my desktop. When I open it now, the database should find that AutoExec macro and it should open up that menu for me. Let's see what it does. There we go. So that's the power of the AutoExec macro at work for you. Simple to do. There's, you can have a little pop-up message if you want or some other things, but this is typically probably 99% of the time what an AutoExec macro is going to do for you, is just open up that main menu so that the user sees that and can start working through the main menu. So as you can see, the menu is being built so the end user doesn't have to deal with this pain on the left-hand side of all the tables and queries and things they don't really care about or know about. This is what we want the user to be able to work with your database through all the forms and reports that we've built for them. So to get to that kind of finished product view, there are also these things called startup options, which will allow you to hide different things in your database. For example, we can have that navigation pane hidden. We can disable some of the menus. And what that really does, it's not really a security measure, but it helps protect the database from people who just inadvertently might mess something up. I mentioned earlier that I helped out that company that the data entry person somehow got into the design view of the switchboard, just some weird keystrokes or mouse clicks, wasn't even looking at the screen and screwed it all up. And so if we hide those things and disable access to that, that's going to help protect the database, right? Just from those kind of inadvertent types of things. So your textbook has some information about this. I'll show you some of these options as well here. So we go in to File and Options. And under Current Database, there are several things you can select, like Display Status Bar, Display Navigation Pane. We're going to hide the navigation pane. You can disable full menus and shortcut menus. And so we'll disable those three things for now. We'll have to close the database and reopen it. Let me use the Quit button just to show you it works. There we go. That worked. And we'll open the database again and see what happens. So look at that. Now we have a main menu. There's no navigation pane. There's really no way to get into anything else in the database. It's all kind of locked out for the user. And so this is really the finished view of what you want your database to look like. A nice menu system, obviously a little nicer looking than that, but a way for the user to interact with all the forms and reports that are necessary for them to do their job. Right? That's how it should be thought of. Now, I want to show you one other thing that's kind of interesting. So if you have a group member that maybe didn't follow up on lectures, I'm going to show you a little practical joke you can play on them. So if we change this AutoExec macro, the best time to do this is like right before you do your presentation, or maybe the night before. You can build an AutoExec macro that does this. And think about this for a minute. So we can set the AutoExec macro to quit access. Think for a minute what that does. Okay, so we'll save this. We'll close this. And what have I done? I've just created a macro that when you open it, it runs and closes the database. Not too good. But since you watch lectures, you'll learn the secret to getting back into the database. In other words, there's a easy way to bypass the AutoExec macro and all the startup options. So as much as I double click, it's not going to work. So you can be the hero and say, this is how we fix it. So the secret is, when you open the database file, you have to have the Shift key held down on the keyboard. That Shift key, while the file is being opened, will bypass the AutoExec macro and bypass the startup options. So I'm pressing the Shift key. I now double click, and there we go. It doesn't run the AutoExec macro, and it doesn't run the startup option. So feel free to have fun with that. And you can be the hero and say, this is how we fix it. You know, this secret backdoor to get into these locked out databases, the Shift key. Like I said, this doesn't make the database secure. A quick Google search, anybody can figure this out. What it mostly does is help prevent people from inadvertently overwriting things or messing things up in the database, because they're limited to just accessing things through the forms and through the reports. Okay, so That is basically it with Microsoft Access. You know, as you think back through the semester and all the different things you've learned, I'm sure the first time you saw Access, you're like, what is this weird program? You might still be thinking that a bit, but I want you to stop and think about really all you've learned. I've seen many of you come into my office hours and you're becoming very proficient with the software. And, you know, there's really no substitute for putting time into something like this, which, you know, through this course, you're being forced to. But hopefully you're seeing the results too, that you are becoming more proficient with understanding technologies like databases. And also don't forget, this isn't just a course in Access where I want you to learn the tool of Microsoft Access. This is the starting point for you to understand databases as a whole. So a lot of what you've learned for Microsoft Access transfers to other database systems and platforms. So don't be so narrow-minded to think that all you've done is learn a little bit of Microsoft Access. You've really learned broadly how databases operate, and you can take this knowledge and transfer it to really any database platform that you have. So best of luck with your continued learning with databases and your continued learning of Microsoft Access. I look forward to seeing all of your projects.